Hi, welcome to Amelia Bedelia Hops to It as we begin to read Chapter 1. Chapter 1, No Fool Like an April Fool. Amelia Bedelia woke with a start and sat up in bed. Something had disturbed her, but she wasn't sure what it was. A dream? A nightmare? Sleepily, she got dressed and headed downstairs. Morning, Cupcake, said her mother. Amelia Bedelia smiled. Good morning. Mommy, she replied, rubbing her eyes. What's for? Her voice trailed off when she spotted the fried egg perched on a plate at her place at the table. The smile faded from her face. Breakfast is served, my lady, said her father with a deep bow. Thank you, my gentleman, said Amelia Bedelia, giving him a quick curtsy. Amelia Bedelia sat down and gulped. How could her father forget that frying was her very least favorite way to fix an egg? Hard-boiled, soft-boiled, scrambled, poached, deviled, yes, please. She'd never, ever turn down an omelet, especially if it had cheddar cheese melted in it. But fried eggs, no, thank you. She stared at the single glistening yellow yolk. Gross! Why were eggs like this called sunny side up? There was nothing sunny about this egg. She began feeling a tiny bit queasy. Something wrong? Asked her father, sliding into his seat next to her. He was smiling and laughing, looking so pleased with himself that Amelia Bedelia did not want to complain and hurt his feelings. No, she said. Thanks for breakfast, Daddy. She picked up her fork, took a deep breath, and poked the yolk. To her surprise, it didn't break. She stabbed it again, nothing. She lifted her fork, and the whole yolk came up with it. She looked at her father. There's something wrong with my egg, she said. Amelia Bedelia's parents both burst out laughing. April Fools, said her father. Your fried egg is actually half a canned peach on top of some vanilla yogurt. Really? Said Amelia Bedelia. She took a bite, then another. It was delicious. Her mother shook her head. Didn't you hear me shriek this morning when I took my first sip of coffee? She asked. Oh, that's what woke me up, said Amelia Bedelia. Her father looked embarrassed. I put salt in the sugar bowl, he confessed. An April Fool's Day classic. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Amelia Bedelia shook her head. Oh, Daddy, she said. April Fool's Day was Amelia Bedelia's father's favorite holiday. He was always coming up with new tricks to play on his family. Last year, he'd fill a bowl halfway with milk, stuck a spoon in it, and put it in the freezer overnight. The next morning, he poured cereal and milk on top and served it to Amelia Bedelia. She was confused when she couldn't budge the spoon no matter how hard she tried. Amelia Bedelia's father stood up and kissed the top of her head. You really were going to take a bite of your least favorite breakfast just for me, weren't you? Amelia Bedelia nodded. Your heart is always in the right place, honey bun, said her mother. Amelia Bedelia placed her hand on her chest. I hope so, she replied. Spring was in the air as Amelia Bedelia walked to school that morning. The sun was shining, birds were singing, trees were budding, flowers were blooming, and bees were buzzing. Amelia Bedelia skipped for the entire last block. She bounced past Oak Tree Elementary's custodian's Mr. Jack, who was trimming the bushes in front of the building. The hedges are getting their first haircut of the year, said Amelia Bedelia. Mr. Jack smiled. Don't you have a spring in your step this morning, he said. No spring, said Amelia Bedelia, just new sneakers. Notice Amelia Bedelia always takes everything literally, so she doesn't always get when a word or a saying isn't always what it really means, like idioms. So you'll see that with all Amelia Bedelia books. Just like, did you notice on the page before this, where they said Amelia Bedelia placed her hand on her chest when they said your heart is always in the right place. She wasn't getting what she really meant by it, that she has a good heart. So she put her hand on her chest like, well, yeah, it's right here where it belongs. So Amelia Bedelia doesn't always get the meanings of everything. That's what makes Amelia Bedelia fun and funny to read. So here we go on to the next. Amelia Bedelia walked down the hall to her classroom because skipping was not allowed inside. So her teacher, Mrs. Shock, was super strict about rules. Students called her the Hawk because she never missed anything. Kids swore she had eyes behind the back of her head. Amelia Bedelia was pretty sure that wasn't true, even though she herself had been caught by Mrs. Shock when her back was turned. Once everyone had settled into their seats, Mrs. Shock said, I hope that you all remembered to bring in your permission slips for the field trip to Seven Gables Farm tomorrow. After she collected and counted them all, she smiled. So far, so good, thought Amelia Bedelia. Thank you, said Mrs. Shock. Okay, now we're going to start our day with a little pop quiz. Amelia Bedelia changed her mind. So far, so bad. The class groaned. Amelia Bedelia began to list different flavors of soda in her head. You get it? Pop, quiz, she's thinking soda pop. Again, Amelia Bedelia doesn't always get the real meaning of things. That's what makes her books funny to read. So she started thinking of all flavors of soda in her head so that she'd be ready for the quiz about pop. So she's thinking, oh, I'd be good at this. Orange, grape, cherry. Take out your pencils, please, said Mrs. Shock. She began walking up and down the aisles, placing a sheet of paper face down on each student's desk. This is a time test, she informed them. The student who finishes first correctly will win a prize. She's still thinking of soda pop, so she's listing all the ones she can think of. Root beer, lemon lime, ginger ale. Amelia Bedelia's thoughts were interrupted by Mrs. Shock's next words. Okay, you may turn your papers over now. The room was silent as everyone flipped over their quizzes. Amelia Bedelia's friends got right to work. She could hear their pencils scratching out answers. Amelia Bedelia stared down at her quiz. It was a single sheet of paper with instructions at the top and a numbered list. Though her impulse was to get started immediately, like everyone else, she forced herself to slow down. Always smart when taking a test. Take your time. Good advice, Amelia Bedelia, she told herself. She began to read the test and quickly discovered that Mrs. Shock had been fooling them. This wasn't a pop quiz at all. There wasn't a single question about soda. Ha ha. This is a test to see how well you follow directions. A prize will be given to the student who completes it both quickly and accurately. But please don't rush. Take your time and be thorough. Read every question on this page before you begin. This is your hint. I'm going to read that again. Read every question on this page before you begin. Number 1, write your name on the top left-hand corner of the page. Number 2, turn the paper over and write your birthday. Number 3, what is 5 times 42? Write your answer here. Stand up and say, my name is, and I am the best at following directions. Number 5, on the bottom right-hand corner of the page, write your name backward. Number 6, draw 12 circles on the back of this paper. Number 7, now draw a smiley face in each circle. Number 8, add 465 and 123 and write your answer here. Number 9, draw a line through each smiley face on the back of this page. Number 10, stand up, touch your toes, and sit back down. Number 11, sing the happy birthday song as fast as you can. Number 12, underline the word "the" every time it appears in this quiz. Number 13, clap your hands 3 times. Number 14. Can't read it. Let's find out what 14 says. While Amelia Bedelia was tempted to ignore the sentence at the top and start writing her answers immediately, especially when it was clear that Cliff was already at number 5 when he jumped up and shouted, "My name is Cliff, and I'm the best at following directions." She was glad she had followed the directions when she finally got to number 14, which said, number 14, answer question 1 and turn your paper over. You are done. Amelia Bedelia gasped. Mrs. Shock was playing an April Fool's trick on them. Trying not to laugh, she wrote her name in the top left corner of the paper, turned it over, and folded her hands on her desk. Mrs. Shock smiled and winked at her. All around the room, her classmates continued to work on the quiz. They were drawing circles, adding and multiplying numbers, standing up and shouting and singing really fast. "Class," Miss Shock finally said, "I need to interrupt you for a moment. Amelia Bedelia, will you please show everyone your paper?" Amelia Bedelia held it up. "You are the winner," Miss Shock proclaimed. "Impossible," said Clay, squinting at Amelia Bedelia's quiz. "She didn't even get to the smiley faces. And she didn't sing happy birthday really fast yet," said Holly. "You were in such a rush to win, you forgot the most important part of any assignment is to follow all the directions," said Miss Shock. "You were supposed to read the entire page before you started. Look at number 14. After a moment, Amelia Bedelia's friends all said, "Oh." Many of them looked embarrassed. "And it's too bad," said Mrs. Shock, "because this quiz will be 50% of your grade this term." And Holly's hand shot up. "What?" She said. "50%? All because you forgot to follow directions," Miss Shock continued. "And here's something else most of you forgot." She paused. "Today is April Fool's Day." There was a moment of silence, and then everyone burst out laughing. "You got us good, Miss Shock," said Teddy. "I certainly did," said Mrs. Shock, looking quite pleased. See you later for Chapter 2.